Right, welcome back. This is the next session, which is Bill's story. And before we start this chapter, which is the solution, could you please remind us what is the problem?
We have a twofold illness.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about the twofold illness.
One part is the obsession of the mind.
Okay, so tell me exactly what it means to have an obsession of the mind.
It means we feel restless, irritable and discontent.
Okay, I call it the hole in the soul. So try to think what brings about that feeling of being uncomfortable. Each of us have some idea. Sometimes loneliness can bring it. Anger can bring it. For me, I don't really know what it is. I know that I just describe it as the hole in the soul. So think about what might actually bring that, restlessness, irritability, and discontentment. Think about it, okay? So you're restless, irritable, and discontent. You feel a hole in the soul. What happens next?
We want to soothe that feeling.
We have a desire. That's right. We have a desire to soothe. So at the end of our drinking, drugging, or behavior like the sex and the food, we don't necessarily want to drink or act out on the symptoms. But we want to soothe these uncomfortable feelings, and we don't know how. The only thing that we know is to use a symptom: drugs, alcohol, sex, food, shopping, gambling, in order to remove that uncomfortable feeling. So we have a desire. When we tap onto the desire, what happens?
We trigger the allergy of the body.
That's right. We trigger the allergy of the body. And what is the name of this allergy?
Craving.
The phenomenon of craving. That's right. So when you hear people at meetings saying, I have a craving, generally speaking, what they're saying is, I have a desire. The craving only occurs when you ingest alcohol and drugs. And I will argue the same phenomenon occurs with the behavioral, with sex, with sugar, with gambling. All of this starts. It does something to us and we cannot stop. So this, in a nutshell, is the problem. A twofold illness, an obsession of the mind, and a physical allergy. Tell me, what do you think is the solution?
The 12 steps.
Okay, so what do you think happened as a result of the 12 steps?
And the spiritual awakening.
Yeah, absolutely. In the big book, they tell us we have a spiritual awakening, a psychic change, or personality change, right? So when this occurs, we're sober. We recovered, and we look into what it means to be recovered later on in our sessions. So, twofold illness, obsession of the mind, physical allergy. That's the problem. The solution to the problem is the 12 steps. So now we're going to read Bill's story, and Bill is going to tell us exactly what is the problem, and he's going to go into details. So what I'd like you to do, as you can see now, it's page 1, chapter 1, and as we said, the problem, as described by the good doctor, Dr. Silkworth, doesn't have a page number. So remember, it's really important to read the preface, the history, and to be able to apply the solution to your problem, you need to understand your problem.
So this isn't the problem, this is the solution.
This is the solution, and that's why it starts on page 1, because now we're going to describe the solution, which is the first 164 pages of the big book. So at the top of the page, can you write in massive letters, the solution? And I want you to write underneath this, Bill describes the powerlessness, progress, and consequences. Powerlessness, progress, and consequences.
War fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of excitement I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time we sailed over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol.
Stop. Can you highlight? I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. And if you write on the side, hole in the soul. So he can't feel the hole in the soul. So for him, loneliness was a way, basically, of triggering that hole in the soul, a desire to soothe that loneliness.
We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much loved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel in an old tombstone.
Just quickly, doggerel, it means poetry. So he saw some poetry.
Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot.
Okay, and this person was Thomas Thetcher, Thomas, and the surname is Thetcher, 1764 was the date. Again, don't believe everything that I say. Also do your own research, and if you think that I'm wrong, let me know.
Ominous warning to which I failed to heed. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises which I would manage with utmost assurance. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company.
Stop. Can you just underline, I took a night law course. That was at Brooklyn Law School.
Why? Why are we underlining that?
I just want to give you some more information. Give you basically a bit more information that we have in the book.
The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects while drunk. That the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grips. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn its fight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements. But my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered the many more reasons later on. We gave up our positions and off-soared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation, so we had a little money. But once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital.
Okay, stop. Just to give you some information, we rode on a motorcycle. That was a Harley Davidson, and that was in April 1925. And the farm they are talking about was called the Ella Gold Foods Farm in Scotia. And why? Near Connecticut. Some of you might know, some of you might not know. It's just some information.
That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there, and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. For many few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drinking was taking an important and exhilarating part of my life.
Stop. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. Here he is not aware he is an alcoholic.
It's fine.
Yeah.
There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chatted in millions. Scoffers would scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night.
Stop. Can you highlight? My drinking assumed more serious proportion, continuing all day and almost every night. Now he's starting to lose control.
The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to the country. My wife to applaud while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter.
Just that you know, Walter Hagen was a golf champion between 1914 and 1929.
I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. It was fun to carry him around the exclusive course, which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of a tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still chattered. I was staring at an inch of a tape which bore the inscriptions XYZ 32.
Minus 32.
Minus 32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar.
Can you highlight? I went back to the bar. That's a solution, right? How many of you have had difficulties and instead of, facing the difficulties, just got drunk or high?
My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal.
Stop. This friend's name was Richard O. Johnson. Just for you as information again.
He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. We went to live with my wife's parents.
And the parents were Dr. Clark and Matilda Hoyt Burnham. Again, just some information for you. That was the name of the parents.
I found a job, then lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years, or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk.
Okay, the department store was Mrs.
I became an unwelcomed hanger-on at brokerage places. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3. got to be routine.
Okay, stop. Can you highlight? So liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine.
Bathtub gin being... What's bathtub gin?
Well, that's basically what they mean, that the amount of gin that he was drinking.
Or just
Cheap.
really cheap gin.
Is it?
I think so.
I don't know.
I think that's what it
I read
refers
it
to.
as cheap.
Cheap gin.
Bathtub gin is like bottom of the barrel. Sometimes I would deal...
So hold on one sec. Can you please, somebody, go from the beginning of that chapter and start reading all the things we highlighted? Everything that was highlighted.
I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol.
Okay.
Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. I went back to the bar. Liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine.
Okay, can you see the progression?
Yep.
Can you identify with that progression?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Fun with problems, then just problems.
Yeah. And the consequences.
Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin followed by half a dozen bottles of beer would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope.
Can you highlight, please? I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope.
Gradually things got worse. The house was taken over by a mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father became ill. Father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point in 1932 and had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender and the chance vanished.
Can you highlight? Then I went on a prodigious bender and that chance vanished. I don't know how many of you had planned a wedding, a flight, and had one drink. I'm going to have one drink. And then you missed your flight the following day. Well, that happened to me on several occasions.
I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I was through forever. Before then, I would write lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so did I. So I did. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk.
Can you highlight? Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. And that reminds me of one of my stories. I've ended up in a hospital once again. I had a blacked out in Soho in London. And when I woke up, I had, peed myself. I was plugged onto the machines and I was ashamed and I cried and it was horrible. And I walked back home and I swore I will never drink again. Never again. And I really meant it. And by the time I got home, I didn't take a shower, I didn't eat, I didn't go to bed to get some sleep. The first thing that I did is pick up a bottle of vodka and drink again.
There had been no fights. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness.
Can you highlight? Confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness.
I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time.
Can you highlight, please? One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time.
But I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there.
Can you highlight the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable? The courage to do battle was not there. And I would argue, actually, that it is forgettable. Because look at me. It took me half an hour to make my way back home from the hospital crying and being ashamed and saying I will never do it again. And the first thing that I did was pick up a bottle of vodka when I got home. So it is forgettable.
My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with 12 glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years.
Can you highlight the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms? For mine endured this agony 2 more years.
Sometimes I stole my wife's slender purse, and when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window, or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling.
Can you highlight? Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window, or the medicine cabinet where there was poison. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because I don't know about you, but my experience has been in the past that I went to meetings and people say, well, at this meeting we only talk about alcohol. It's a AA meeting. We don't talk about drugs. We don't talk about anything else. What these people are doing literally is saying, well, if you have another problem, another symptom, not problem, another symptom, then you can't talk about this symptom. And I believe that actually has had a massive impact on me and my recovery, because I only thought that if I stopped drinking and using drugs, then I would be okay. I wasn't told that actually sex and sugar and, all the other behavioral symptoms could be as potentially dangerous as alcohol or even drugs. So I think what is important to bear in mind here is, like Bill W. tells us, and by the way, I used to go to the cabinet where poison was. And if doing a little bit of research, the poison was LSD type downers to calm him down. And a little bit further on, we will see actually even Bill W. was also using other type of drugs. So that was also part of his story. Alcohol was part of his story, but the drugs also were part of his story. So when we go to meetings, we talk about the problem and the solution. But then all the other symptoms are also very important to acknowledge and take into consideration. Nowadays, people are more accepting of talking about drugs and alcohol in meeting. But remember, a few years ago, they had to start another fellowship because people were not allowed to talk about drugs. And that fellowship is NA. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There were flights from city to country and back, as my wife and I sought escape.
Okay, can you highlight? So there were flights from city to country and back, as my wife and I sought escape. What do we call that?
Geolocation.
Geographics, yeah, that's right. Escapes. Because you know what? If I move to America, that's it. I'm going to be fine. If I move to South Africa, I'll be fine. If I move to London, I'll be fine. Well, I'm taking my head with me and my disease, unfortunately.
Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I.
Can you highlight? So next day found me drinking both the gin and the sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I. So you see, now it's telling us not only is drinking alcohol, but he's using medication, be it prescribed medication, but it doesn't matter. He's using something to soothe the hole in the soul because alcohol is no longer, working for him.
I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics.
Okay, just a couple of information here. The brother-in-law's name is Dr. Leonard V. Strong Jr. and the hospital is the Charles B. Tan Hospital in New York City. Who do you think works in that hospital?
Doctor, good doctor.
Dr. Sequoff, that's right. Okay.
Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hypotherapy and mild exercise helped much.
Okay. Do you know what the belladonna treatment is? Can you highlight actually this? The belladonna treatment was called a deadly nightshade. It was an herb containing a poisoning alkaloid, which is a sedative, a very strong sedative. I remember when I was in a psychiatric hospital in the ward, I was so high and so fucking paranoid by the time I got there. That given me liquid to drink to make me sleep, and I slept for 3 or 4 days. That's all I did in order for the chemical to get out of my body.
Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally.
Can you highlight? I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally, and that was Dr. Sequoff.
It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects.
Can you highlight? Amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects.
My incredible behavior was in the face of a desperate desire to stop, was explained.
Okay, can you highlight my incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. So what did the doctor, Dr. Sixworth, explain to Bill W.?
Twofold illness.
He explained that he was a hopeless type of alcoholic and he had a twofold illness. He had an obsession of the mind and he had a physical allergy. So surely, understanding when you have an illness should provide, help. Let's see.
Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge.
Can you highlight self-knowledge? Well, just know that self-knowledge is not the solution.
But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more.
Can you highlight? But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more.
The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year.
Okay, do you know what a wet brain is? Okay, tell us a little bit about it.
I think it's specifically caused by very, very severe thiamine deficiency, but it was before doctors now kind of help prevent that from happening, but basically where people drank so much alcoholically for such a long time that they just did unfixable brain damage.
That's right, absolutely. They call it the Korsakoff syndrome. And what it does, it brings confusion and loss of mental activity that can progress to coma and death. So that's what wet brain is, not deaf brain. Well, you become deaf brain anyway. Okay.
She would soon have me give over to the undertaker or to the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master.
Can you please highlight? So no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. What is this? For Bill
Step
W.
one.
It is Bill step 1. Can you write Bill step 1? It's not your step 1. It's Bill step 1.
Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit, but then came the insidious insanity for that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again.
So Armistice Day, it's on the 11th of November, and that actually was Bill's last drink, the last time he drank.
Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere, or I would stumble along to the miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn.
Can you highlight how dark is it? It is before the dawn.
In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes.
Can you highlight, please? I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And can you write on the side, these are the step 1 promises. People always refer to the step 9 promises on page 83, and these are the promises of the big book. But actually, the big book has promises throughout, and these are the step 1 promises. And also, I love this, being catapulted into the fourth dimension of existence. And I always thought, well, what can it be? Because if there are 4 dimensions, surely there must be another 3 dimension. And I think, then the dimension number 1 is the body. We are born, we realize we have a body. Dimension 2 is the brain, intelligence. The dimension 3 is feelings. We feel. So what do you think could be dimension 4? Spirituality.
Yes.
Faith. In something. In the solution, maybe.
Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected that there was enough gin to conceal about the house to carry with me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober.
Stop. Can you highlight? He was sober. And you see, the font?
Yes.
Yeah, it's expensive. So, his name, Abbey Thatcher, actually his full name is Edwin Throckmorton Thatcher, which is Throckmorton. And remember, Thatcher, there's no T. 29th of April 1896, and he died on the 21st of March 1966. He was sober. So the surname again is Throckmorton.
It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I would drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirits of other days. There was that time we had chatted on an airplane to a complete jag. His coming was an oasis in that dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened?
Can you highlight? The door opened and he stood there, fresh skin and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? And that is what we were talking about when you see somebody coming into a meeting and they look so different a couple of weeks later.
I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious. I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I have got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracks about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire all right, but bless his heart. Let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching.
Okay, so let's remember here. Bill W. was not religious before. Bill W. did not believe in God because there is this misunderstanding when Bill W. was always godly, and this wasn't the case. He didn't believe in God. Okay, go ahead.
But he did know ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told me how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment.
Okay, can you highlight two men had appeared in court? I believe there were three, actually, not two. And where these men coming from? Do you remember?
Oxford.
The Oxford groups. That's right.
They had told of a small religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the results was self-evident. It worked.
Can you highlight? They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. Can somebody open their book to the second edition and read the little chapter that we highlighted in page 16 in Roman letters? Just to remind us, what did they say?
Though he could not accept all tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God.
Okay, and these are the 5 tenets, which are used into steps.
He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested.
Can you highlight? He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. What do we call that?
Sharing a message.
Yeah, carrying the message. It 12 steps someone.
Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside, that had preferred temperance pledge I had never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence on that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things, but I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. my intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in the spirit of the universe, who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory.
Okay, can you tell me which is the key word here in this last phrase?
Irritated.
Can you underline? Irritated. Restless, irritable, discontent.
To Christ I conceded the certainty of such a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, and the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe, and since the power of God in human affairs was negligible, the brotherhood of man, in a grim jest, if there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. But friend sat before me, and he had made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he would not do for himself. His human will had failed.
Okay, stop. Can you highlight? But my friend sat before me and he made a point-blank declaration that the solution had done for him what it could not do for himself. His human will had failed.
Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Since his power originated in him, had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all.
Okay, can you highlight all of this? So like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Highlight all the way to, and this was none at all.
That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart that had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past, here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil.
Can you highlight? He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil.
Despite the living example of my friend, there remains in me the vestiges of old prejudice, my old prejudice.
Can you highlight? Despite the living example of my friend, there remain in me the vestiges of my old prejudice.
The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for no such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a Tsar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I had since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea, he said. Why don't you choose your own conception of God?
Okay, can you highlight? So my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of a solution?
That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last.
Okay, can you highlight? I stood in the sunlight at last.
It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning.
And that's very important. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a solution. Nothing more is required for many of us to make our beginning. And this is Bill step 2. Willing. Just be willing. Nobody's asking you to write an essay on higher power or God or what it looks like or what it might look like. Are you willing to believe there might be a solution? Yes or no? Have you admitted that you have a problem? Yes or no? This is as simple as it should be.
I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would.
Can you highlight? So upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Remember, here we are gathering the information. We're gathering the information of what is the problem, and we're gathering the information of what is the solution to our problem.
Thus, I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans, what we want, when we want Him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have Him with me, and He came. But soon the sense of His presence had been blotted out by worldly clamours, mostly those within myself, and so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time.
Can you highlight? At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. And that was, he was admitted in a hospital in New York City, December 11th, 1934. Bill was 39 years old.
Treatment seemed wise, for I was showing signs of delirium tremens. There I had humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood Him, to do with me as He would. I placed myself unreservedly under His care and direction.
Stop. Can you highlight? And we're going to be starting to use a lot of colors, so be ready, people. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood Him, to do with me as He would. I placed myself unreservedly under His care and direction. So for me, is I place my life and my will under the solution. When I have somebody who guides me, I trust them to guide me through the solution. What step is that?
3.
That's step 3.
I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without Him I was lost.
Can you highlight? So this is a little bit, this one is already, a little bit difficult, because that's quite a difficult one, and I'm still not sure if it is accurate or not. But, I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, but without Him I was lost. And I will say, and this is step 6. This is the only place where I was able to place it. Can somebody turn the big book to page 59 and read step 6 for us?
We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character.
I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, but without Him I was lost. That's really the only place I was able to put step 6. In the book, I put 6 and 7 together. It's like became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. So I put them together. And I'm still not sure, but I think this is the only place where we can really get step 6 here.
I ruthlessly faced my sin.
Stop. I ruthlessly faced my sins. Which step is that?
Step 9.
No.
4.
That's step 4.
And became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch.
Okay, and became willing to have my newfound friends take them away, root and branch. And remember to use different highlighters. Which step could that be?
5? No?
7.
7, that's right. Do you want to read 7 for us? Go on page 59 and read 7 for us, please.
Because to me it's telling his friend.
Well, so...
Humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings.
That's right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies.
Okay, stop. Can you underline, don't highlight, underline my schoolmate. Who was my schoolmate? Or his schoolmate, sorry. Abby Thatcher, that's right. And then can you highlight, I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiency. What step is that?
Step 5.
Step 5. That's right. So, remember, Bill W. is in a hospital. He humbly offered himself to the solution. He's doing a step 3. Then he admits for the first time all his defects of character. Step 6. Then he ruthlessly faces his sin. He's doing his step 4. In his head, probably on a piece of paper. And he becomes willing to have his newfound friend remove all his defect of character. Step 7, then his friend Abby Thatcher comes to the hospital and he does a step 5 with his friend Abby. Okay, continue.
We made a list of people I had hurt and towards whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrongs.
Stop. Can you highlight? We made a list of all people I've hurt and towards whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. What step is this?
8.
That's step 8. How many components in step 8? 2. Tell me what are the components.
Made the list.
We made a list. M-A-D-E. We don't make a list. We made a list. When did we make that list?
Step 4.
On our step 4, that's right. And what is the second component?
Becoming willing.
And we're willing. That's the 2 components of step 8. So when you're in step 8, the only thing you need to do really is take your list and take the name of that list and say, am I willing to make amends, yes or not? If you're willing, it's yes. If you're not sure, there are maybes. And if you say, no, I don't think I'm ready to make amends, it's no. Simple, it's already all done for you. Continue.
Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability.
Stop, can you highlight? Never I was to be critical of them. I'm not going to dump my stuff on them. I was to write all such matter to the utmost of my ability, my part in it. What step is that?
9.
Step 9, that's right.
I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become an uncommon sense.
Can you highlight? I was to test my thinking by the new solution, the new consciousness, the new ideas that I have now. Common sense will thus become uncommon sense. What step is that? 10.
11 as well.
But 11 is coming next.
I would sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others.
Okay, so this is your step 11. Can you highlight? I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. What is interesting about that step? You know that I don't pray and I don't believe in God. So for me, doing prayers and meditation is not really something that I do. I don't pray. I'm not very good with the meditation because I have not found my third eye yet. But I'm sure one day I will get there. However, when we get to the step 11, as now you're doing your gratitude list daily and you're using one of the appendix of the book, in your gratitude list, you have a set of questions, which is actually your step 11 question. So although I don't do prayers and meditation every night, I do my step 11. A lot of people think that they do a step 10 at night. We do not do a step 10 at night. The step 10 is done throughout the day. In the evening, we do step 11. There is a night part and there is a morning part of the step 11. Okay?
Then only might I expect to receive. But that would be in great measure. My friend promised that when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all of my problems.
Okay, can you stop here and highlight? My friend promised when these things were done, I will enter upon a new relationship with a solution. That I will have all the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems, not just my drinking problem, all my problems.
Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things with the essential requirements.
Okay, so first of all, believe in it. So don't highlight anything here, but believe in the power of the solution. Plus enough. Can you highlight different colors? Willingness. It's a principle, willingness. Which principle is it? Principle 6. And if you don't know your principle, turn into the appendix in a book with the principles. Honesty, highlight in a different color. Which principle is honesty?
1.
It's the foundation of your program. If you can't be honest, this is not going to work. And can you highlight humility? Which principle is humility?
3.
7. You need to go back at the end of your book and you need to check your principles. So, what it's telling us that if we do all of this work, then we will have a spiritual awakening. Okay, so my friend promised that when these things were done, I will enter a new relationship with the solution. I will have a psychic change. I'll have a spiritual awakening, right? But he said, you need to believe in that solution, but you also need to have willingness. You need to be honest, and you need to have humility in order to establish and maintain a new order of things. They are an essential requirement. Does that make sense? So can you highlight to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements? These are the principles. You have 12 principles. For step 1, honesty. Step 2, hope, faith, courage, integrity, willingness, humility, brotherly love, and so on. Learn your principles, people, because you're going to have to practice the principle.
Simple but not easy.
Stop. Can you highlight? Simple but not easy. And my interpretation of this is Bill W. said simple to do the steps. But it's not easy to practice the design for living. Carry the message, practice the principle, and practice your assets. Because for me, that's the hardest. To be honest every day. That's so difficult. Really, really hard. And you would think this is probably the easiest thing, to be honest. But honesty doesn't come just by saying, dishonesty doesn't come by just saying, a white lie. It's also about not saying your truth, not saying no when you want to say no and you're going to say yes. It's all of those things. So honesty, really, really, really vital for your program.
A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness.
Can you highlight? It meant destruction of self-centeredness.
I must turn in all things to the Father of Light, who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity I had never known.
Thank you. Can you highlight? So these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity I had never known. So, you understand the problem, the twofoldness. The solution is you take the steps. At the end of the steps, you have a psychic change, a personality change, spiritual awakening, right? But that is not enough. You are merely sober, but if you start practicing the principles of the program, willingness, honesty, humility, something happens to you too. What do you think is that? That peace is talking about and that serenity is talking about. What is it?
Emotional sobriety.
Emotional sobriety. Being sober is not enough. You need to reach that emotional sobriety. Because remember, everything that I did in active addiction, when I was using drugs, alcohol, sex, food, gambling, whichever of these symptoms was to be at peace, was to remove that hole in the soul to bring peace about. Okay?
There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up, as though the great clean wind of a mountain blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound.
Okay, can you highlight? So the solution comes to most men gradually, but the impact of the solution on Bill W was sudden and profound. Remember, then Bill W had a sudden spiritual awakening, a sudden psychic change. This is not the rule. Okay, this happens rarely to people. Generally speaking, it's a gradual change. So don't be surprised if you don't have that, bulb, eureka moment thingy. Just don't be scared about that. You don't expect anything to happen when you do your step 3 or your step 5. Just take all the steps and do the work, and something will change in you. No doubt in my mind.
For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor.
Stop. Can you highlight my friend, the doctor? So, who was it again? Dr. Sickworth. That's right. So he called Dr. Sickworth.
To ask if I was still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you that I don't understand. But you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were."
Okay, can you highlight? So something has happened to you, I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were.
The good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. He knows that they are real.
Okay, can you highlight? He knows they are real. I know it is real also. I can't tell you how really, but I know this works, and people will be actually recovered at the end of this program.
While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have had what had been given so freely. Mm-hmm. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others.
Can you highlight, please? While I lay in a hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. What is that? Step 12. And here we are, people. You have the 12th step here in Bill's story. Bill told us exactly how he did it.
My friends had empathized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said.
Can you highlight? Particularly, was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said. So highlight all of this, and can you underline faith? Which principle is faith? 3. Principle 3, that's right. So some people say, well, the principles were written after. Yeah. So were the traditions. However, you can find some of the principles in the big book. They're here, they're written.
And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die.
Okay, can you highlight, please? And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive, and the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. So you see, when you complete the program, you need to carry the message. Don't let anybody tell you that you have to wait 12 months, because you could bloody die in 12 months. You might be dead, so carry the message immediately.
Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate. My old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time, and I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment.
Can you highlight? And I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. And these are feelings you might go through as we go through, our early recovery. It's normal. Nothing, wrong about it.
This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. But I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day.
Thank you. Can you highlight? I soon found when all of the measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. When I was going through my divorce, this is what I did every day. I just had groups of people and I just carried a message. I was doing exactly what I'm doing with you now. And you know what happened? It took me out of myself. I didn't think about it. And when I finished each sessions, I felt positive again. I felt connected again to the program. And I wasn't crying my eyes out anymore. I didn't want to jump out of the window anymore. I was okay. Just because I was walking with you.
That's when I met you.
Yep.
Yeah. I didn't know you were so sad.
I was.
Many times I'd gone back to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going.
Bingo. Can you highlight it is a design for living that works in rough going? So what is the design for living again?
Carrying the message.
Carry the message.
Practicing the principles and assets.
Practice the principles, and we added, what do we practice? The assets, because we don't want to practice our defect of character, because we know when we practice our defect of character, consequences, lies, deceits, anger, whatever it is, they're not nice. So don't worry, your step 6, we're going to find them all.
We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown among us to which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part.
Okay, can you highlight? So we commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. And the meetings, and it's such a shame that today we don't really take the big book and carry the message within the big book. We carry a lot of opinions and experiences, but is it really what is contained in the big book? Very rarely, in my experience.
The joy of living we really have, under even pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. Have seen the most impossible domestic situations rightened. Feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one Western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 20 to 200 persons. We're growing in numbers and power. In 2001, A is composed of over 100,000 groups. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not, or would not, see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose one would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish.
Can you highlight? But just underneath there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish.
Most of us feel we need to look no further for the utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men and women.
Okay, and to men. So Bill W., co-founder of AA, died in January 24th, 1971.